Well, friends, the Watchtower Society received a lot of publicity this past week, this time in the United Kingdom. On Monday, November the 20th, the Telegraph, BBC News, and the Daily Mail all simultaneously ran headline news stories about Jehovah's Witnesses. Now, these stories could have been about positive initiatives that the Watchtower was undertaking, such as announcing that they were going to convert some of their unused buildings in the United Kingdom into low-cost housing for the elderly and disabled in order to combat the epidemic of homelessness. But no, these stories were not about fine works or humanitarian efforts. They were about victims, victims of childhood assault perpetrated by Jehovah's Witnesses and covered up by the Watchtower Bible and Tract Society of Britain. Now, this first article from the Telegraph of November the 20th carries the headline, Jehovah's Witnesses claim they were told not to report child abuse, as organization is accused of sheltering abusers. Several victims have come forward to accuse the organization of a systemic cover-up, with some revealing they were assaulted as children. And it has a statement from the Watchtower organization saying that the incidence of this crime among Jehovah's Witnesses is rare. Now, this article is probably the most interesting of the three because it contains two very important points made by Kathleen Hollisey, who is a child abuse lawyer and, not coincidentally, the first solicitor to win a historic child abuse case against the Watchtower Bible and Tract Society in Britain. She says that she believes the scale of child abuse was similar to that exposed in the Catholic Church. Speaking to the Daily Telegraph, she said, frankly, I would equate this to a scandal and a cover-up akin to the Catholic Church, knowing about abusive priests and moving them from parish to parish. The two are identical. Most of the cases I deal with in the Jehovah's Witnesses organization are in relation to abuse by people in positions of trust within the organization. She goes on to say that the true numbers and scale of the problem have been suppressed because the internal teachings and policies of the organization strongly discourage victims from coming forward. Now, the second interesting point that she makes is that she believes that the Charity Commission should strip the organization of its charitable status. She says, I think it is reaching the point where we do really need drastic action, and we need something like the removal of their charitable status, because despite the litigation, the inquiries, and the court orders, they don't seem to be changing. Now, the article from the BBC News England carries the headline, Victims Told Not to Report Jehovah's Witness Child Abuse. Now, this article centers on a 3-month-long investigation conducted by BBC Hereford and Worcestershire, where they researched the new claims of child abuse in the Jehovah's Witness organization by speaking to many victims, men and women. One of these victims, Louise Palmer, waived her right to anonymity. Now, you may have already heard Louise Palmer's story because Mike and Kim posted 2 videos on their channel containing an interview with her as well as a television and radio interview with Mark and Cora Latham, who have tirelessly worked to give voices to these victims and to keep this issue before the appropriate government officials such as the Charity Commission. So I urge you to go to Mike and Kim's channel to watch both of these videos. The last article in the Daily Mail carries the headline, Victims of Jehovah's Witnesses Abuse Told Not to Report It. Religious organization accused of trying to cover up attacks to protect its reputation. Children abused by Jehovah's Witnesses claimed they were silenced. Victims say the religious organization was too worried about saving face. One child abuse lawyer believes there could be thousands of victims in the UK who have not come forward yet. And the article concludes with a denial from the Watchtower organization, saying the latest claims were unfair and misleading. Congregation elders do not shield abusers from the authorities or the consequences of their actions. Any suggestion that Jehovah's Witnesses cover up child abuse is absolutely false. This raises one really big question in my mind. If all these claims that Jehovah's Witnesses cover up child abuse are absolutely false, then why did they mount such an unprecedented legal challenge to the Charity Commission's right to investigate their child safeguarding procedures, appealing it all the way to the Supreme Court and losing back in 2016? And why are they continuing to fight in the lower courts the Charity Commission's request for documents about their handling of recent specific cases of child abuse? If all these cases were handled appropriately and there were no efforts to cover up or silence victims, it seems to me that they would want the Charity Commission to examine these documents because they would be exonerated in the process if these claims were absolutely false. Which brings me to the last point I want to talk about. On Tuesday, November 21st, a member of Parliament of the Conservative Party, Alex Chalk, announced his intention to bring these recent cases of the handling of child abuse by Watchtower before the entire Parliament. Now, he gave two reasons for wanting to do this. The first was so that he would be able to question the government ministers and in the process educate them about this issue. But the second and more important reason was that he wants to see the Watchtower Society added as a subject of the international inquiry into child sexual abuse in England and Wales, known as the IICSA. Now, why is this so important? Well, the international inquiry into child abuse in England and Wales is similar in scope and purpose to the Australian Royal Commission. And indeed, it's supposed to be modeled after that commission. Now, unfortunately, up to this point, it has not been nearly as well administered. It has been plagued by leadership problems. The original chair resigned last year, and so it has not really gotten up and running. But when it does, it has the potential to have the same kind of impact as the Australian Royal Commission did. Now, up to this point, there are only two religious organizations that are included as subjects of investigation by the IICSA, and they are the Roman Catholic Church and the Church of England. Alex Chalk says he wants to see Watchtower added as a subject of that inquiry. Let's listen to the entire clip from BBC News on November 21st.
Here's the latest headlines. BBC Hereford and Worcester's investigation into sexual abuse in the Jehovah's Witness organisation is being raised in Parliament. More on that in a minute. And this, our investigation has led to the Conservative MP for Cheltenham getting involved with this. Alex Chalk, good morning.
Good morning to you.
Now, you're going to raise this, aren't you, in Parliament? What do you hope to achieve by bringing this to Parliament's attention?
Sure. Well, there are two things that I want to do, one of which I've actually already done. So the first thing is actually to raise it specifically with ministers and the government itself. So I've spoken to Robert Goodwill, who's the Minister of State for Children and Families, and I've said, look, drawn this to the attention of government, saying this is something that needs to be considered. But the real point is this. There is already an inquiry, the independent inquiry into child abuse, which is up and running, which is looking at the broad gamut of abuse potentially perpetrated historically across the piece. I think this needs to be part of that. And I want to make crystal clear, this mustn't be about persecution. It mustn't be about witch hunt. This must follow the evidence. But if there is evidence of impropriety and systematic cover-up within this branch of Jehovah's Witnesses, well, that needs to be looked into, it seems to me.
Alex, what have you heard? Have you had people come forward to you and speak to you about this? What kind of evidence have you had brought to you?
Well, I've had evidence along the lines of your last piece, essentially people suggesting that because of this two-witness rule, that unless the internal, as it were, authorities within the church satisfied that there are two witnesses to the abuse, it's the nature of this kind of allegation that there very rarely will be more than one, namely the alleged victim, that this will not be put forward, this will not be investigated properly. So it's really consistent with that. Now, I want to be clear, these things need to be investigated fairly. Let's work out whether the allegations are true or not true. Let's not prejudge it. But certainly I've heard enough which suggests to me that this is something which merits the most careful consideration.
Have you had direct contact with the Watchtower, the Jehovah's Witness headquarters?
No, I haven't. They haven't made contact with me, and if they are to do so, I'm perfectly prepared to speak to them, of course. I've had people, constituents, who've come to me to give their accounts, and it seems to me that on the face of it, these are serious allegations. They are supported by what appears to be an undenied position, namely that there are requirements within the church before things start to be investigated. So you've heard of the two-witness rule, but there's also a sort of informal limitation. In other words, if the allegations are considered to be too old, that they won't be investigated. Well, that's not a principle that's recognised in English law. And given that they seem to have some kind of, as it were, independent support to that extent, I think they require further investigation.
Well, we've obviously asked to speak to them. They haven't spoken to you, but I mean, just in case of balance, they've said Jehovah's Witnesses abhor child abuse and do not shield abusers from the authorities or from the consequences of their actions. So that's what they're saying. But I mean, clearly you have concerns about their safeguarding. What do you think needs to change, Alex?
Well, I do have concerns about their safeguarding. I mean, I also think they've just got to be more transparent, and I think they should look to engage in this process. I'm sure they've made a statement, and that's fine, but I think it would be useful to hear from some of the individuals in the church. Let me make it clear again, this isn't about persecution, this is not about saying people can't practice their faith, but it is about saying that in a society which takes its duties towards safeguarding children very carefully, that there has to be absolute transparency about something as serious as this. Of course, people must practice their religion, but that is not a license to allow things to take place which are unacceptable.
OK, Alex, thank you very much. I'm sure we'll speak again at some point because he will be raising this, as he said, in front of the ministers in Parliament. And again, here's a statement from the Watchtower. Jehovah's Witnesses abhor child abuse, do not shield abusers from the authorities or from the consequences of their actions. But equally, it would be good to speak to them. We have given them opportunity, and so far, yet nothing from them.